I'm Pastor Gerald, and I'm the pastor over at First Baptist Church here in Marshalltown. I'm looking forward to seeing you at the Marriage Retreat. Now, sometimes people get frustrated about Marriage Retreat, and they think, oh, that's going to be boring. I get to talk about the subject of fellowship. Now, there were people in Jesus' day that thought they had fellowship with him, and Jesus even talked about that. He said, you know, some of you are going to come to me at the last day of judgment and say, I preached in your name, I taught in your name, and obviously I have fellowship with you, Jesus. But Jesus said, I never knew you. What would it be like if you made that mistake with Jesus, but what if it was a mistake that you made with your spouse, your husband, or your wife, and you think that because you're married, you live under the same roof, you go to the same church, you ride in the same car, maybe you think you have fellowship, but what if you really don't? And you don't really know the other person, or they know you. That's what we're going to talk about in one session at the upcoming Marriage Retreat. Look forward to seeing you there.
Mark your calendars. Next Sunday, February 21st from 6 to 8 p.m., we'll be showing the movie War Room. Why don't you come and enjoy this family uplifting movie? You're invited by our Hispanic congregation to stay after church on February 28th in the gym for a lunch right after the service. Our Hispanic congregation will be providing the meal and variety of authentic Hispanic cuisines. Hope you can join us.
So what do small groups mean to me and why they are important to me is because my husband and I, we get to share our lives with other people, and that is something you can get in no other place where you can be so vulnerable. We've had times where we've got to share tears of joy and tears of sorrow. We've shared personal testimonies and prayer requests, and those have been so important in our lives. There was a time when we took a break from small group in order to do other things, and it was very, very missed. And I have described this once before, but it's kind of like, if you've never experienced it, you don't understand what you're missing. It's kind of like eating Dairy Queen. If you've never had it, you don't know what you're missing out on. But really, it's true. If you haven't ever tried a small group, you don't know that you're missing out on some really meaningful experiences and relationships, and that's what we found. So I encourage everyone to get involved in a small group, because you build big relationships with other people that also are following the Lord, and most importantly, you strengthen your relationship with the Lord in ways that you can't do on your own. So yeah, we encourage everyone to get involved in a small group.
How about now? As good as our worship band is, whenever we applaud, we're not applauding them. We're giving praise to our God. And that's not something unusual. David talked about that in the book of Psalms. Clap, clap, clap. Don't forget that. You know, we've been talking for a while now. Last week we started a brand new series, but we call it Life Detours. When life gives you some unplanned detour, it may be that you have a destination, you're at one stage of life and you see you're going to another stage, or maybe God even gives you an unction in your heart. You're going to go from here to there, but you don't go directly. There seems to be a zigzag. God works in zigzags much more than he works in direct destinations. And I think the reason for that is God cares more about your character than he does about your destination. And when he takes you from here to there, just because you're going to get there doesn't mean you're ready to be there. There are things he has to put into your life, things he has to shave off, and things he has to sharpen in order that you will be ready for that opportunity. When life takes you on an unexpected detour, someplace you didn't expect to go and maybe didn't even want to go. Now, we started a couple weeks ago saying, you know, when you have a life group, we want you to ask some questions at the beginning. We want today's message to have a prolonged effect. We want you to be thinking about things. And so I'm trying to give you a few questions up front that we'll answer during the message, and then those questions again at the end so you can take them to your group with you. Question number one for this week: have you ever done the right thing and suffered for it? You did what was right, and you expect somebody to say thank you. You expect a reward. You expect one thing, but maybe that's not at all. Maybe that's the very opposite of what comes. Question number 2. What's the difference in knowing when to resist the devil and when to run from him? There is a time for both. Do you know what that is? And thirdly, what kind of boundaries are there that you can establish to help you when it comes time to resist or it comes time to run? With those boundaries, you may well know the difference in that. We're going to start today in the same story that we were in last week, which was the story of Joseph. But we ended last week around verse 38. Chapter 38. So today we're going to start in chapter 39. Chapter 39 of Genesis. All right? At that point, you know from experience, or maybe you were here last week, if you were not here and you don't know the story, Joseph had a vision from God. He had dreams that told him he was going to be a great leader. He had dreams that his family would actually bow down to him. I don't recommend sharing that dream with everybody if you have it, okay? Especially with your brothers who are all older than you. They don't care for that. It's going to set up a difficult time for you. He shared that dream with his brothers and with his family. It created a lot of dissatisfaction. They were jealous over him. After all, Dad had already shown him that he was the favorite. His father gave him that coat, that famous coat of many colors. If you don't know the Bible story, maybe you know the Broadway play about Joseph's Technicolor dream coat. That was what he gave to this boy. Well, the brothers decide they're going to get rid of him. They hate him so much they're going to kill him. Two of the older brothers, they decide not to kill him, and they persuade the others, let's don't do that, but we can't go back with him. He can't go back with us, so let's sell him as a slave. He was sold as a slave, and he was taken down to Egypt. That's where we're going to pick up the story. Genesis chapter 39, verse 1, it says, "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt." Next verse, or the next part of that verse. "And Potiphar, an officer of the Pharaoh and captain of the guard, an Egyptian." Well, now let's pause for a minute. Obviously, he is an Egyptian since he's going to be working for the Pharaoh, but I want you to notice that. He is the captain of the guard. That's going to play an important role. Why? Because there's going to come in this story we covered today that Joseph and Potiphar's wife makes up some lies about him, and Joseph is thrown into prison where the king keeps those people who are really rebellious against the nation. Now, his crime, which wasn't even a crime, she lied about the whole episode, but he gets thrown into prison. Why? Because this guy's captain of the guard. He's the guy that's got keys to the kingdom and keys to the prison. So it says here that he was a captain of the guard, an Egyptian, and they bought him from the Ishmaelites. Now, that's an interesting feature, too. If you remember from our Walk Through the Bible seminar, we said Abraham had two sons. Ishmael and Isaac. Okay. Now, Ishmael, then, he is not the son that God's going to send the blessing and the promise through. It was this brother. And it's from this brother that the descendants became the Jews. Now, notice, they didn't sell him to a Jew. They didn't sell him to an Egyptian. They sold him to the Ishmaelites, to his cousins. Now, when Joseph, at the end of the story, at the end of Genesis 50, when he goes down into Egypt and he brings the rest of the family down there too, there are about 70 of them. 70 Jews. That's the whole nation. It's not a bunch of people. If the Ishmaelites had enlarged and propagated about the same rate, there's going to be about 70. This is not a big tribe of people. And they're cousins. And they willingly take Joseph as a slave because they're going to get money for him. And they take him down into Egypt. So they bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. Now notice the next line. The Lord was where? with Joseph. Now, it's easy to think when your life takes a major detour, you're with your family, you've got great visions from God, and your dad loves you, and suddenly, instead of going out here to be the leader, you take a zigzag tour down into Egypt. But we are tempted at times like that to think, God, where were you? Where was God when Joseph went into Egypt? He was with Joseph. And everything that Joseph put his hand to, he was a successful man. He was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And when you are in the will of God and God is with you, God blesses you, and all that your hand touches, other people take notice. His master saw that the Lord was with him. And the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight. Wise man Potiphar. He sees God at work. He's not so taken by it that he necessarily becomes a fellow believer in this God that has given Joseph favor, but he recognizes God is with this man. So the story goes on. Then he made him overseer of his house. He's not just a slave, he's now the manager of the entire household. And all that he had, he put under the authority of Joseph. See, if somebody's able to make money with everything you give to them, then you give them a little more. And if they make more with that, you give them a little more. And they do well with that, so you give them more until eventually you've given them all that you have because they've proven themselves. Did he do that? Yes. Keep reading. So it was from the time that he made him overseer of his house and all that he had that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. Now, I can't help but think this is the way planet Earth is with Christians populating all around the globe. God has used Christians with the Holy Spirit in them to temper us from being all that we would be without the Spirit of God trying to bring us to him. That's why the Bible says about you being the salt of the earth. You save it from going totally destructed. Well, in this case, Joseph's presence in that house was not only a blessing to him, but it was a blessing to the Egyptian as well. Keep reading. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. It's not just here, it's everywhere within his area of influence. So he had left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread he ate. Now, what does that mean? It means he took no care. How much is in your bank account? I don't know. Go ask Joseph. How much food is there in the barn? I don't know. Go ask Joseph. All I know is I got what I need, and I'm not worried. I don't have to plan. I don't have to fret. It's all into his care. Joseph is quite the guy. Now, we're in verse 6. Changes gears a little bit. Says in part B of that verse, now Joseph was well built and handsome. I want you to know, Joseph and I have nothing in common. Okay? Well built. You know, my wife said you need to get in shape. We said round is a shape. Well built and handsome. He is the Brad Pitt of his day. Okay? And then at verse 7 says, and after a while his master's wife took notice. Well, I guess so, because he's well built and handsome. That's right. So she takes notice of Joseph and says, why don't you come up and see me sometime? Come to bed with me. So, now, I don't know this woman, but as we read that, whatever she lacked in purity, she made up for in directness. You, me, bed. And the situation is that Joseph is at a very vulnerable position in his life. He's not He has rule over the household, but not over her. And she, being the wife of Potiphar, has some kind of direct authority over him. So that puts him in a ticklish or prickly situation. He right now has an enormous opportunity and a tremendous temptation to step across the line of holiness and do what may be convenient. It wouldn't be right, but it would be convenient. And that's going to be the challenge to his character. What will you do? What will you do at this particular stage? Now, as I read more about Joseph and going through here, he's not only vulnerable because of his position, but he's vulnerable because he's isolated. What friends does he have? What family is there that can hold him in check? Who's going to view him and hold him accountable to anything? He's isolated and away from family, from friends, and any kind of an accountability group or partner. I've told men in the church that if you find yourself going astray and your thoughts or your eyes are doing things other than, then let's talk and let's find you an accountability partner. Somebody that when you are about to step across the line into that which is unholy, you can call them, they can call you. Somebody who's going to, if you've gone off on a business trip and you come back, they call you on the trip or they call you when you get back and you know you're going to have to answer. Accountability is not a bad thing. During this time of temptation, he has no support group. He has no accountability to anybody. Whatever he does, pretty much he could do it and get away with, except God would know. Now, I'm trying to get inside of his mind. Not only is he alone and isolated, but this loneliness, it can creep up on you. There was a time, well, from the time before Sharon and I were married, that I hated being alone. I detested being alone. One time I was on a train in the backwoods of Romania at midnight. Had the entire train car to myself. It was snowing outside. It didn't look much different there than it does here today, except there was a full moon that rose in the sky, and that was about the only light that I could see outside. The mountains were streaking by, the snow was pouring down, and I started singing because nobody else was there. But it was to the Lord. And I walked over to the train door, and I just stood there and looked out at the beauty of the moon and the snow. And I took great delight in being alone with God. And that problem has never bothered me since. But I think Joseph is not only lonely, I think he's also quite discouraged. God says you're going to go from here to here. He didn't tell him about the zigzag. He didn't tell him it was going to cause him to lose his family. His brothers are going to hate him to the point of wanting to kill him. Didn't tell him that. Didn't tell him that the brothers are going to deceive dad, dip your coat in animal blood, take it to him and say, guess what happened to Joseph? You're going to be ripped away from your family and your loved ones and those who love you, and you're going to be sold as a slave. God kind of left that part out. And when you don't see how God's going to get you from where you are to where he promised that you would be, you begin to wonder. And when the wonder comes, doubt comes. When doubt comes, courage leaves. And that's the meaning of discouraged. I've been taught that there are 4 times you should not make a major life decision. And it hinges on a word called HALT, H-A-L-T. Each one of those letters stand for something. Don't make a major life decision when you are H, hungry. Don't go to the grocery store hungry. You're not going to make wise decisions. Okay? Don't make major life decisions when you are angry. So many pastors have decided on Monday morning, that's it, I'm through. And they haven't had time alone with God to get over that hump from whatever it was they were angry about. L is lonely, and that's where I find Joseph. And T is tired. Sometimes you just get so exhausted that the physical side of you affects the spiritual side of you, and the spirit isn't listening to God, it's listening to your tiredness. Situation's going to be aggravated for Joseph, because Joseph, not only is he well-built and handsome, he's very competent. And there's something about competency that is attractive to the other sex. Think the name Henry Kissinger. Is Kissinger a good-looking guy? No, he was not. I'm sorry if he's here, I'll apologize, but yeah, no, he's not. But because of his competency, it attracted the opposite sex. So now he's got competency, he's got a well-built frame, he's a handsome guy, and he's vulnerable, isolated, lonely, and discouraged. And here's a powerful woman that comes in and says, why don't you come up and see me sometime? And this powerful woman doesn't leave it at that. She's making repeated attempts to seduce him. Now, guys, if you are in a business where you travel a lot, you probably know quite well when you are on the road, when you are in travel and family's not there, and whatever you do in a hotel room or whatever you watch, wherever you go from there, who's going to know? I'd ask you, where and when are you the most vulnerable? What's happening when you find yourself the most vulnerable? I would encourage you to become a student of yourself. Know where your weakness is. Know the weak places that you go. Know about the opportunities that are there for Satan to bring temptation into your life. If you don't study that, if you don't profoundly look at that aspect of life, you are probably going to fall. Now, let's get back to the story. Chapter 39, verse 7. After a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. Verse 8. But he refused. There is a time that you are to resist. There is a time that you should refuse. Okay? There is. Just say no. Now, I know that's a very popular phrase that we put out into our schools, but something's missing from that. Just say no, but know why you're saying no. Some people just say, no. Why? I don't know. And then they can be talked into doing it. Say no by itself is not enough. You also need to know why. And Joseph comes up with that. In the rest of that verse, he says, with me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in his house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you. Nothing but you. The last part of that verse, because you are his wife. Joseph understood the limitations that he had. He said, I can go here, I can say this, I can do that, I can buy this, I can sell that. He gave me total control of everything in the house but you. And he's focused on what he has, not on what he didn't have. And isn't that where Adam and Eve fell into sin at the very beginning of time when God made man and woman, put them into the garden? He said, you can go where you want. You can do what you want. You can eat anything that you want except the fruit off of one tree. And Satan's, his strategy was, let's look at the one thing you're limited from. Let's look at the one thing that you're restricted from having. Let's look at what you don't have rather than what you do have. And I think learning that to focus on what you have and not what you don't have, what you can have rather than what you didn't get, is one of the true secrets of contentment. Joseph also refused to betray those that had been trusting of him. I'm not going to do this because Potiphar has given me control of everything but you, and I'm not going to betray him. Let me ask you a question. Who would you hurt if you choose to step across the line into sin? Who would you hurt? I keep a list. My wife doesn't even know that. It's in a little secret spot. Yeah, she goes there sometimes. My list. My wife, my kids, my grandkids, my church, my deacons, my staff, my parents, my in-laws, previous churches and friends, God and Savior, and the cloud of witnesses who are looking on even if no one else is. Guys, let me encourage you. Make up your own list. Of course, now I got to find me a new secret place. Why? Why do you do that? Because you're learning to set some boundaries. You're learning to do in the times that you're strong, plant little seeds that will keep you strong when you are weak. And here was a greater reason for Joseph. Chapter 39, verse 9, part C. How then could I do such a, what's the word? Wicked thing and sin against God? You know, with television the way it is and what we see in the movies, we don't think of sex outside of marriage. We don't think of adultery as wicked. We just kind of write it up as, wrong, not right. But we don't see it the way God sees it. And he says, wicked. And this sin is against God. It's not just against my wife. It's not just against my kids and my grandkids, my church, my deacons, my staff. It's not just against all the people that I've got on my list and you may have on your list. It is against God. Joseph recognized that all sin is ultimately against God. And I think that is what gave him the strength. Verse 10 says this. And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or what? Even be with her. He set boundaries for himself. He said, I'll go this far and no further. And it's not a good thing if I'm in the house with her. It's not good if I'm even in her sight because I know what's going to happen. And temptation will be there, not only for her, but the temptation will be there for me. Therefore, I will not even be with her. Guys, you need to set some boundaries in your life. There are certain safeguards that we use here at the church. Every ministry office has glass in the door. Why? So nobody can whisper what went on behind closed doors. And you are less tempted to ever let anything happen because people can see. Billy Graham many people would say he was going overboard, but he made a pledge years before that he would not ride in a car with another woman alone other than his wife. And you hear about a lot of pastors and a lot of preachers who hit the slippery slope of sin, and it destroys their life, and it destroys their family, it destroys their ministry, but you never heard that about Billy Graham. Why? He set boundaries. We leave windows in the doors. Guys, let me share this with you. If you have a problem with porn, okay, now we're going to deal with this in some men's sessions, I hope, in the days ahead, but here's something that I've found, I've learned about that you can do. There's an application that you can get called Covenant Eyes. Covenant Eyes. And what it is it encourages you to make a covenant with your wife or with an accountability partner that you will not go to certain sites on the internet with your phone, with your laptop, with your tablet, with your desktop. Doesn't matter, you won't go there. But if temptation gets the better of you and you do try to venture out, it sends an email to your wife or to your accountability partner that says you all might want to talk about this site. Whoa. Now, if I tell you to do that, and wives, I suggest you do not tell your husbands to do that. But guys, I would suggest that you take the initiative if that's a problem in your marriage, and you instigate that. You go to your wife or you go to your accountability partner and say, I got a problem, and I think this is something I can do that can help. And I want to entrust this to you, that I will be trustworthy because you can check up on me. That's a great, great way to do it. That's a tremendous way. What are your boundaries? Do you even have any? Have you set some up? I think this is one of the ways that Joseph was able to withstand the temptation. He set boundaries. But here she comes. Once you say no to Satan, that is not enough. Satan comes again and again and again and again and again and again. Temptation's like that. It's not satisfied with just one temptation. You don't resist it just once and move on. And the scripture said there that she spoke to Joseph day after day after day after day. Joseph's options weren't too many. Joseph reinforced his commitment with boundaries. And here's the thing, you can too. And ladies, I know I spoke to the men a few minutes ago about potential sin in their life, but you're no exception. What boundaries have you set up? Do you have any? Let's get back to the story. Verse 10. Though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused. And here's that thing about temptation. Sometimes even when you do say no, it just keeps knocking and knocking and knocking and knocking and knocking and knocking. And when it quits for a while, you think, I got past that one. I made myself invulnerable. I'm the Superman over that sin. And then 6 months later, that temptation raises its head again. Verse 11. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants were inside. Wait a minute. This is apparently a big house. There are more servants than just him. This has got to be a sizable place, if not a mansion of their day, and nobody is inside. That's like going to the White House and seeing it empty. It's not supposed to be empty. How did it get empty? Maybe she told all the other servants to leave or gave them jobs elsewhere. I cannot help but think she emptied the house. After persistent refusal, Satan may tempt you with reasons you thought you had eliminated before. After all, who would know? If Joseph had gone to bed with her and no other servants were there, who would know? Apparently, Joseph's belief in his honorability, his character before God was such that knew God would know. So he tries to leave. Verse 12. She caught him by the cloak and said, come to bed with me. This is the story he has heard before. This is a plea and a temptation. It's not the first time that it's come to mind. So he leaves the cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. Okay, before now he has resisted and he has said no. But now he not resists, he does what? He runs. Refusal is not always enough. Sometimes you have to run. You have to get out of the place of temptation. Like the song of the gambler. I know we're in church, but I listen to the radio. Remember that story? You got to know when to hold him. Know when to what? Fold him. You got to know when to, and know when to run. And the same thing can be said about temptation. So he ran out of the house. Verse 14. She is scorned. And she calls to all the household, wherever they were, whenever they came back, or she called out to them, they came back in. She said, look to them. This Hebrew has brought to us, who has been brought to us, has come to make sport of us, to make fun of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. Is this a truth or is this a lie? This is not the truth. This is a lie. Does that matter? Well, in the scheme of things, we'd like to say the truth matters or the truth always comes out. No, it doesn't. Satan is the father of lies, and if he's there to take you down, he will cause lies to spring up. Verse 15, when he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. That's not the truth either. Don't be surprised that when you resist Satan, Satan turns the bigger guns on you. It's going to happen. Verse 16. She kept his cloak beside her until her master came home. You ever feel like a kid who changed the grades on his report card and your mom says, just wait till your dad gets here? Yes, I know how that feels. Yes, I wanted to just die in the bathtub. I did. My dad was coming home. Well, see, I took band, and I played a saxophone. This is kind of off the story of Joseph a little bit. I played saxophone, and the band director, he was a big guy. I mean, big guy. And he had this nasty-looking beard, and he smoked a cigar. Now, this was in the days back when you could do that. He didn't really smoke the cigar. He would light it in the morning, it would go out, and so he chewed it from the back to the front. So you can imagine through the day he's got all this icky chewed tobacco around his mouth. And if you didn't play the right note, if you played it in a way he didn't like, he'd say, let me show you what I mean. Let me show you how to play that. He takes your instrument and plays it. I did not play the music instrument the rest of the day. I took my mouthpiece home, sterilized it, got a new reed put on it. I didn't do very well in band. So when the report card came out, I had never made a grade like that. I thought, I can turn that C into a B. And then I thought, why stop at B? So it magically became an A, but it was real messy looking. And my mother just looked at it and said, I'll show you report cards for your dad when he gets home. I made sure I was not there when Dad got home. I went to the bathroom. I took me a long soaky bath. And when my dad came by, he knocked on the door. Are you in there? Yes. I want to talk to you when you get out. Okay. This is the truth. With my hand raised, this is the truth. I laid down in the bathtub, crossed my arms, closed my eyes, and said, God, just take me now because he's going to send me later. And this is true. I laid there and I thought, can it be that quick? Is it that smooth? I wonder if I'm in heaven. I'll risk a peek. All I saw was bathwater. I thought, oh no. He had the report card, the proof, and I was in trouble. She has his coat, and it's proof that he was there, but not that he did anything, and the lie took root. Verse 17. Then she told him this story. I like the way it says that, the story. It's a story. It's not the truth. It's a story. She told him the story. That Hebrew slave that you brought to us came to me to make sport of me. I'm not sure what the title of that sport is. But then she went on. She said, but as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. She's lied to the servants. She lied to the servants again. Now she's lied to her husband. And those things take root. And when she has the coat to back up her untrue story, then he believed it. Now, we like to say, I said a moment ago, we like to say the truth will always come out. But sometimes it's not before other lies do. Verse 19, when his master heard the story that his wife told him, saying, this is how your slave treated me, he burned with anger. Verse 20, Joseph's master took him and put him where? Whose prison? The king's. Look at this. The place where the king's prisoners were confined. How did he get access to that? He is the captain of the guard. Not everybody that made sport of somebody else is going to get thrown into the king's prison. But Joseph is special. Why? Because God has a plan for him. And it included prison before the palace. He was about to suffer for doing right. He did not violate his standard. He did not violate God's standard. And he's now going to pay the price for it. But here's the question. Do you do right so that you don't suffer? Or do you do right because it's right? If you do right because you think the truth is the best way to do it and not suffer, then you will be discouraged, dismayed, and despondent later. When lies do come in and untruth does take over, life isn't fair. But the question is, where was God when all these things were happening to Joseph? We've already seen God was with him whenever he went into the Potiphar's house. Life is not fair, and it was meant not to be fair, but your life is meant for God's glory. To get us to the place where our life does give him glory, he has to shape us, he has to mold us. When you suffer after you've done right, doesn't the temptation come? that you think, God, where were you? God, you're not doing your God job very well. God, you said I was going to go here, but instead I've gone out here on a zigzag course. Why did God do this? Why did God allow that? And you begin to doubt God. And yet the scripture said that God was with him. The latter part of verse 20 part C, I call it. But while Joseph was there in the prison, what's the next line? The Lord was where? With him. And he did what? Showed him kindness. But I'm in prison. I made it as comfortable as I could for you, Joseph. But you need to be there because I've got plans for you. I have plans to put you second in command to all the nation, but we've got to get you ready first. It's interesting. I had Russell back here this morning was telling me about when he was in the Army. And he said, you know, when I went to, where do you go first when you go into the military before you go on to be stationed? You go where? Boot camp. Russell had gone to boot camp. Why? To get you ready to serve elsewhere. And God will put prison, if necessary, in your life to get you ready. And while you're in boot camp, while you're in God's boot camp, which may be in prison, it may be as a servant, God will still be there. Part B of that verse says, and not only did God show kindness to him, he granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. He whispers into the warden's ear, hey, pay attention to this guy. This guy right here. Don't worry about the others. Pay attention to this guy. Watch him. And God opens his heart that he will have favor toward him. However dark the day, God not only knows where you are, he not only knows what is happening, but number one, he is there, and number two, he is at work. And I know in your dark days, it doesn't seem like that. But that's why these stories are in the Bible for us. When Joseph had set his heart and his character to be pleasing to God, even though the bad things came into his life, God was still there and God still had a plan for him. Joseph's promise of being with his father and eventually being in command took a great detour. It was detoured to slavery by the rivalry of his brothers. He was detoured again by lies, and that detour took him to prison. I want you to understand something. For God, the hard part is not getting Joseph's brothers to eventually bow down to him. The hardest part, I think, for God is getting Joseph ready for the place of influence and the power of influence that he's going to put him in. Not only a place of influence, but a position of authority. This authority that's about to be handed to Joseph, if he's not ready, it'll be used in the wrong way. It'll be used for the wrong thing. And God's overall plan wasn't just for Joseph. It was for all of Joseph's family, all of the Jews, to go down into Egypt because there's going to come a famine in the land that would have destroyed them all. Except God sent Joseph ahead, prepared him, and the land and the people were saved. I don't know where you are in life, but I would venture to say you are either in a detour, or you're coming out of one, or you're in the midst of a zigzag from one detoured location to another. Most of us are. You need to know this. God will finish what he started. He tells us over and over again, he who began a good work in you will complete it. And it might mean a road to Egypt. It might be in slavery. It might be hardship. It might be in discord. It might be in prison. But I've learned this too. The greater the degree of the zigzag is either due to one of two things. The greater the degree of sin in your life that God has to get out and your own choices have led you there, or it's just God totally in charge and he's preparing you for something. Something that requires intense preparation. Why? Because God cares more about your development than he does your destination. Let me ask you a few questions. Are you right now where you thought you would be? 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15, 20? When you were a teenager, what were your dreams? Are you living that dream? If not, maybe you're in a detour. Have you forgotten to set up boundaries in your life so that you can resist sin when necessary and you know when to run? Do you have safeguards, whether it's a little piece of paper in your wallet or something else? It might be a family photo on your desk, on your wall, somewhere in your car. It's something. Or you just kind of live life helter-skelter, and if temptation comes, you'll just deal with it the best way you can. Put some boundaries in. Question, have you suffered for doing the right thing? Have you been doubting God's presence or his care because of what you're going through? Have you forgotten that God not only has designed for your life, but he's intimately involved? I don't know where you are. I know that the Bible says these stories of the Old Testament were written for our instruction. They are things that we can learn so that we grow strong in Christ. If you're not as strong as you want to be, if you're not as strong as you need to be, if you need to renew your faith, in just a moment, we're going to be singing a song and we're going to open the altar and you can come kneel and you can pray and you can renew your position with Christ. If you've failed to set boundaries and you've fallen into sin, build some boundaries. Do some things so that you don't do it again. The sin that you fell to one time will probably be tempted to do again later. We like to think that I learned the lesson the hard way and so I won't do that again, but that is often not true. If you're doubting God because of your location, maybe you need to renew your promise and your understanding of him. He is intimately involved in your life. And wherever you are, it's not some place that he doesn't know about. And it's not some place that he can't do something in your life while you're there. I don't know how old I'm going to get to be. I don't know how long I'm going to live. I don't know what my final destination while I'm still here on planet Earth is going to be. But I have to think that everything in my past and present is ushering me toward that goal, whatever it is that God set for me. Let me have a word of prayer with you. We're going to ask the band to come, the worship team to come, and then we're going to stand and sing. And while we're standing, that'll be an opportunity for you. If you want to come and kneel around the altar, you come. Let's stand together. Our Father, we want to commend this time to you and our hearts to you. Help us to remember in our darkest day that you are still there. In the darkest hours of discouragement, you're there. When our life seems to have taken a detour, you're there. You're there and you care about us. You have a plan for us. Wherever we are in life, we can get toward that goal and that destination that you've set for us. But God, our character needs to be made right. We understand that. And sometimes you have to put us into servitude. Sometimes you have to put us into prison. And that doesn't happen literally for us, but we end up in places we didn't design, places we didn't want, places we didn't expect. But may we remember your hand is still there. In the midst of being in prison, you showed kindness to Joseph. May we find and experience that grace from you. May we be reassured of your love for us and your tender care for us. And Father, the greater the zigzag we understand, maybe the greater the goal is that you have for us. And we want to submit ourselves to you, that you'll shave what needs to be shaved off of our life. You'll sharpen us where we need to be sharp. You'll mold us the way you want us to be. Father, make us malleable in your hand. Make us willing to serve an almighty God.